The Bulls and Bears this week, Gary B. Smith, Jonas Max Ferris, John Layfield, along with Susie Welch and Nomiki Konst. Welcome, everybody. John, time for candidates to be fighting for tax reform rather than fighting with each other.
Oh, yes. This vituperate banal banter between these guys is just offensive. We're trying to pick the tallest leprechaun out of this group. They want to talk about each other's spouse. They want to talk about who's getting money from who. Nobody is talking about policy. And that's the reason that we've had 70,000 plus pages in the IRS. And the effective tax rate has stayed basically the same since the 1950s. Look, Hauser's Law says we take in about 19% of GDP per annum, despite the fluctuation of tax increases and tax decreases. And the reason is because the wealthy are getting benefits from politicians and the burden is falling on the middle class. Nothing has changed, and these politicians are just trying to get elected. I don't think any of them even care about policy going forward. They just want to be in the White House.
But, Susie, it's time to start fighting for the folks and for the people who need an easier tax system.
Well, we need an easier tax system. We need a system that people can understand. Right now, you couldn't find a single person who could explain our tax system. But I'd actually say we need to have a really big food fight about this. We need to have a big national argument about it, because the tax code of the United States, which must be reformed and hasn't been reformed in a really long time, is really just a reflection of American values, right? I mean, what your tax code is in any country, in France, in Mexico, it is a reflection of what the country, what it values, how big government should be, who should be taxed, who are the heroes, who are the villains. Now, right now, we've got a political election that proves to me one thing, which is that there's no more two parties in the United States. There's four parties. There's the way left, there's the sort of left, there's the sort of right, and the way right. And so it's going to be pretty hard to find consensus on what our tax code should be, but let's have the fight. Let's stop talking about all the dumb stuff that John mentioned, and let's talk about the real stuff, the stuff that really matters, because we can't continue the way we are. Let's have that fight, and let's have that discussion.
No, this is really a choice about who spends your money better. Do you get to keep it and you spend it? Or does the government do a better job at it? I think I know what you're going to say.
Well, yes and no. I mean, up until this point, I think I've agreed with everybody here, which is a shocker. We've made it 3 minutes in. Listen, I mean, the middle class has been on a decline for the past 40 years. You know, poverty is at an all-time high. This is a problem when working class citizens who are working double the hours are paying more in taxes and can't afford, daily goods. That means there's something wrong. The people who are paying taxes are the working class, and the rich people, unfortunately CEOs, who are getting tax benefits, and corporations are sending their businesses overseas for tax benefits. And this is a major problem, and it's part of the tax code that has been lobbied by, and it is complicated, Susie, but it's been lobbied by these companies who just don't want to pay their fair share and want to put the burdens on the backs of the workers and still not give them enough hours so they're on government benefits. So overall, it's a system that's broken. The tax system, no one wants to pay their fair share, and unfortunately, people have to go on government assistance.
Well, and Gary B., the dirty little secret is that Bernie Sanders wants to raise about 24 different taxes, and he's going to hit lower income and middle income taxpayers with higher taxes. But should the focus be reform, like a simpler tax code?
Well, I think, Dagan, the real question is, what should the real size of the government be? You know, no politician, in my opinion, the size of the government should be much smaller than it is now, but no politician, especially on the left, is going to say, hey, elect me, I'm going to do less. I mean, no one's going to say that, although that's what they should do. But the answer from the left is always, we need more money. We need more money. And to Nomi's point about the fairness, she always points out, not she, but the left always points out, the rich fat cats, these corporations aren't paying their fair share. She's right. They're paying more than their fair share. Dagan, as we've discussed in this show many, many times, the rich, quote unquote, pay the bulk of the taxes in this country. It's the middle class and the poor that pay, if anything, a lot less. My question, though, is if you ask the average person what are they getting for their taxes, they look around and they say, I don't really know. We have a poverty rate, as has been pointed out, that's actually higher than since the war on poverty took off. We have a military budget that's 8 times bigger than bigger than the next 8 countries combined, and yet terrorism is springing up all over the world. And we got an infrastructure, despite the billions that we spend on transportation, that sort of stuff, that's falling apart. I can't figure out why the money we send it to D.C. now has any effect at all.
Right, Jonas, time to starve the beast, so to speak?
Okay, let's correct a few myths here. Just because the average voter thinks they pay a lot of federal tax and doesn't know what they're getting doesn't mean that's necessarily so. This study includes all the super wealthy people who pay so much more in tax than they eat and what their house costs, even their beach houses. That's why that figure is what is the average the typical American working family spends way more on food, housing, and the other thing than they pay in tax. They're probably paying a single-digit federal rate because of all the complexity and deductions and child credits in the tax code now. We have a hugely progressive tax code. It's more progressive now than under Clinton. Obama raised the high end higher and kept the low cuts that Bush put in. So you pay very little tax. Let's pretend, let's forget that lie that politicians keep telling you so you believe it. The other slight problem is at the very top end, there becomes tax avoidance and things in the code that let you pay we're talking about a few thousand people, maybe 10,000 now that we're looking at the Panama Papers, who are paying essentially no tax on some fraudulent income that's hidden, and then a very low tax rate on all these capital gains. But for the vast majority of wealthy people who can't afford to set up Panama LLCs, they are paying the vast majority of the taxes. To say that's not a fair share is absurd.
And John, I'll point out that the about 400 wealthiest Americans are paying the highest average tax rate right in the most recent year available than they have since the 1990s. But to that point, how do you fix the tax code so it's easier for people, so it's easier for the average person to prepare their taxes?
You simplify it. You throw it out and you start over. Whether that's a flat tax, whether that's some type of consumption tax, but you've got to start over. What we've done decade after decade is just add more and more to the tax code. That's why it's 70,000 plus pages. And remember, look at the tax receipts. We are at record revenue right now. $3.2 trillion is what our federal government brings in. When President Obama came into office, we brought in about $2.1 trillion. So it's up 50%. Despite the fact that the debt has gone from $10 trillion to almost to over $19 trillion right now. So we're doubling our debt. We've got 50% more taxes. And what are we getting out of this? The infrastructure is dilapidated. Congress can't get along. The problem is the morons in Congress, you give them $1, they're going to spend $1.50. Until that stops, reforming the tax code is just giving these guys more money, because we're at the average right now of taxes coming in according to GDP.
But, you know, here's the one issue that you guys are discussing. Those are people, and those are wealthy individuals. What about the corporations like Mattel that paid absolutely zero in taxes last year but got $235 billion in returns? Or CBS, the same sort of company, they're receiving so many tax benefits and not paying. And those are the ones that are here in America. Let's talk about the ones that are moving overseas and taking the jobs away.
They would have overseas if they...
Naomi, they're moving...
Go ahead, Susie.
No, they're moving overseas because they are seeking better tax treatment for themselves. And it's not because, Naomi, before you say that this is because the fat cats want to make higher salaries, that's not the case. It's because they want to return higher returns to shareholders who happen to be widows and orphans, along with people of average means. And so, yes, the corporations are shopping for lower taxes because we have a ridiculous tax code for corporations in the United States. And so $2 trillion is overseas. It shouldn't be. That's yet another reason why we have to reform the tax code, because we're losing corporate taxes here because of a terrible tax code.
Gary B., I just wanted to point out, though, that we always forget about these incredibly regressive taxes that are hitting everybody in places like the highest sales tax in the country in Chicago. A soda tax has been proposed in the city of Philadelphia. It's that plus the ridiculous tax code at the federal level that we all need to tackle.
Exactly, Dagan. Look, it gets into larger question. Throw in the lotteries that we now have nationally and at the state level, which is basically a regressive tax also. Look, you throw that all in, it's because every government, local, state, federal, is starved for money. They want more money. They want to become bigger and bigger and bigger. That's what politicians do. That's their power. If they grow a bigger department, they have more success. So we need to rethink at some point, what is the role of government? Otherwise, I'll tell you what, we're going to go the way of Greece very easily.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.